everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name's Meg Drexler, and along with my colleagues here at Community Business Bureau, we're delighted to welcome you to ILC Ready, our new program for community organisations who want to build their skills in planning projects and applying for funding. With thanks to the funding from the Department of Human Services through its NDIA Community Inclusion and Capacity Development Grant, the ILC program is free. The ILC Ready program is free. Now, joining us today, we have people from all kinds of organisations, big and small. We have some experienced grant applicants, but also people who've never done a grant application before. This webinar, and indeed our whole ILC Ready program, is for all of you. If you are experienced, some of the information we present today might be familiar, but do stick around because we'll be sharing some new stuff too. And you'll also have a chance to share your knowledge in our interactive Q&A. Before we get started, I'm going to share some tips to help you get the most from today's webinar. First, sign up. If you're watching today but didn't register yourself, you can do so by clicking the link at the bottom of your screen. If you know anyone else who'd like to join us, please feel free to share the sign up link with them too. This is an interactive program, so the more people get involved, the more we'll be able to learn together and from each other. Today is just the start of ILC Ready. Still to come, we have 2 more webinars and a full day live workshop that will be touring South Australia next month. We've also opened the opportunity for organisations to apply for individual support from our consultants to develop a proposal for future ILC grants. More on that at our website, and we'll talk more about that opportunity later as well. So on your screen, you'll see some tools that will allow you to interact with me and with the other people attending today. At any time, you can write a message in the chat window at the bottom right of your screen. That will be seen by everyone. If you don't see your chat window now, you might need to just click in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and it will pop up. My colleague Kirsten Tate is moderating the chat today. Hi, Kirsten.
Hi.
So if you have any technical questions, you can write a message to Kirsten in the chat window as well. You can also post a question, which I encourage you to do. There are 2 ways to do that. You can click or tap on questions, ask a question at the bottom of your screen. You'll see all the questions that have been posted and you can vote for your favourites or add your own question there. If something pops up in the chat that you want to add as a question, then back in your chat window, just hover your mouse over the comment and click the question mark to add that into our bucket of questions as well. We'll be answering as many questions as we can in about 50 minutes time when we start our live Q&A. And joining me for that live Q&A today via phone will be Kim Taylor, Assistant Director ILC at the NDIA. So she'll be on hand to answer your questions about all matters ILC. So we hope you enjoy today's webinar. Remember, to get the most out of it, ask questions and vote for your favourites. So today's webinar is all about the big picture of the ILC. I'm just zooming the screen in so that you can see my slides now. ILC stands for Information, Linkages and Capacity Building. It's part of the NDIS, which means it's a federal government initiative, and the ILC funds projects to help all people living with disability and their communities. There's a lot of different terms and concepts involved in ILC, so we're going to start today's session by unpacking some buzzwords. Then we'll look at how the ILC fits into the big picture of the National Disability Strategy. We'll look at the new ILC funding strategy, including the key changes from the previous approach. And we'll learn about the 4 different ILC grant programs that are now rolling out. So that's the future for ILC, but we'll also be looking backwards a little at some of the many projects that are already making a real difference for people living with disability and their communities. There will be organisations both big and small, and we'll be looking at how those organisations are already making a big impact by answering the needs of their communities. So that's our agenda today. Now on with the show, starting with buzzwords. There is a whole lot of buzzwords and concepts that you'll come across in the world of ILC. If you have lived experience of disability, you might already know some of these, but you might not. So as we go through today, I'll explain each term and concept as we come across them. If you're still not sure on something, feel free, don't be shy, just reach out in the comments. There's also a glossary that we've created that you can find at our website, and we'll be sharing a list of links at the end today where you can download that glossary too. So, ILC. ILC is all about inclusion. It's about including people with disability. And that's up to all of us. Because we all need to be part of making a more inclusive society, all kinds of organisations can get involved in ILC grants, even those who might not have had a lot of experience with disability. So we're going to start today at the start by reflecting on just what is inclusion. If you haven't already, you might like to use the chat window to share a couple of words describing what inclusion of people with disability means to you in your role with your other participants. Perhaps a good place to start in understanding what inclusion means is to really get clear on what we mean by disability. Depending on your life experiences, your culture and your knowledge, disability might mean many different things to you. One common way to think about disability is based on a medical condition. So, for example, if you have a condition that means you can't walk without help, pretty much everyone would understand that that's a disability. So much so that a person in a wheelchair is pretty synonymous as a symbol for disability. But there's two problems with that definition. First of all, disabilities are not always visible or obvious. Second, having a medical condition and a disability are not the same thing. Whether a person is able or disabled also depends on the world around them. Here's an example. Look at this Paralympian runner. With the right supports in place, in this case his prosthetic legs, he can run at an incredible speed. Now, I'm trying to increase my step count right now. I'm nowhere near running, that's for sure. So even if you gave me prosthetic legs, I'd have no hope of catching this guy. The right supports unlock his incredible ability as an athlete. Here's the UN's definition of disability from the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. It's a pretty long one. I'll let you read it if you like, but also we can just break it down to a few key points. Disability is something that is based on a condition that's going to be long-term. It means that the person with that condition experiences barriers that prevent them from participating on an equal basis. But with the right support and inclusion, there's no disability, only wonderful, unique human ability. So you might have been sharing your thoughts in the chat. Are there any to share there, Kirsten?
Just Michael with his comment.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, irrespective of impairment, everyone can participate in community life. Means being able to get a job without having to make extra effort. That's a great point, Michael. And here's a cartoon that helps illustrate that as well. And really what we're talking about is, I think, being able to participate on an equal basis. It's important to understand that's not the same as equal treatment. So you might have seen some variations on this theme before. In this example, we're seeing three people who are trying to watch a baseball game. There's a fence in between them and the baseball game, and they've all been given the same size box to stand on so they can peek over the fence. Even though they're all treated the same, it's clearly not fair because the shortest person cannot see over the fence. The tallest person has an amazing view and the middle-sized person is just managing a peek. In the second picture, each person is given different support depending on how much height they need to be able to see over the fence. Now they're all participating in watching the game on an equal basis. The person who's the shortest is equally able to see the game and is no longer experiencing disability. They're enabled. But there's also another way to create an equal basis on which people can participate, and that's to remove the barrier. Replace the wood fence with mesh, and everyone is able to see the game without extra support, regardless of their height. The game has been changed to include everyone. That's really important because here's the big picture. Did you know that 4.3 million Australians live with disability of some kind? About 2.5 million of them are under 65. That's a whole heap more than the 460,000 that are estimated to be eligible for individual funded supports through NDIS plans. So with so many Australians living with a disability, inclusion is important to all of us. And that's why we have a national disability strategy. I can see that there's some awesome comments that have come through as well, just on our last point. So thank you, Sarah. We might unpack that one a little bit more in our Q&A at the end. So the National Disability Strategy is there for everyone who lives with disability. And it's part of a long history of changes in the way our society understands and treats disability. Back in 1992, the Disability Discrimination Act was introduced, and that's a law that supports the rights of people in many settings like workplaces, the health system, the education system, and so on, along with other laws that protect our equal rights. In 2006, the UN established the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, which Australia ratified in 2008. The National Disability Strategy was agreed by the Commonwealth and every state and territory not long after that. 2010 was the date, and its vision is an inclusive society where everyone is treated as an equal citizen. So it's important to understand really that disability rights are human rights, and the National Disability Strategy is there to make sure that we meet our commitment to those human rights. If you would like to read that National Disability Strategy, or indeed the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, a link is available at our website. You might also be interested to know that there will be a new National Disability Strategy soon for 2020 and beyond. And the federal government is currently inviting the public to have their say about that. So you can visit their website, engage.dss.gov.au. We will share a direct link to this at the end of today as well. Consultation is open until the 5th of July if you're interested in that. So the NDIS is in charge of putting the National Disability Strategy in place, and there are two parts. First of all, there's the NDIS Plans and ILC. Let's look first at NDIS Plans. So NDIS Plans are for those people that have what is deemed to be a permanent and significant disability, something that's going to be lifelong. They get funding to pay for the help they need to live life on the same basis as everyone else. Before the NDIS, the government paid service providers to deliver that support, but now with an individual NDIS plan, people can be given money that they spend on their choice of support from their choice of provider. They can even buy support from providers that aren't government funded. So having an NDIS plan is like being able to choose which game you want to see, the type of box you prefer to stand on, and where you get the box from. The second part of NDIS is the ILC. And unlike NDIS plans, ILC doesn't provide funding to individuals. ILC provides grants to organisations to carry out activities in the community. Its goal is for people with disability to actively contribute to leading, shaping and influencing their community. In other words, just to be included as equal citizens. So ILC and NDIS plans are both part of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Let's break down how the scheme works. Many people with disability will get the support they need from the mainstream systems we all use. There's another buzzword, mainstream systems, All it means is the systems we all use, like education, healthcare, housing, and so on. There also, of course, is an important role played by informal support from friends, family, and community groups. Some people will need specialised support. For that, there's the NDIS plans we just talked about. Then there's the NDIA's partners in the community. A few more buzzwords here. They include ECEI, which stands for Early Childhood Early Intervention Partners, and the Local Area Coordinators, or LAC. The ECEI support kids under 7, and local area coordinators help everybody else. Those partners in the community are the first point of contact for people who are experiencing disability and want some help. They're there to help all Australians link up with information, find supports that will help them, whether that's an NDIS plan, mainstream systems, or informal sources of support. And they're also there to help build the capacity of the community to be more inclusive of everybody. The NDIA also provides grants for information linkages and capacity building projects that make it easier for people with disability to be part of the community and to make it easier for the community to include everybody regardless of their ability. So in summary, you can think about ILC grants as an investment in inclusion. The NDIA does some information linkages and capacity building. Some is done by the partners in the community, the LACs or the local area coordinators and the ECEIs. And some is done by organisations, perhaps like yours, who are given grants to deliver projects in their communities. So that's the big picture. By now, we have uncovered many different buzzwords. I wonder how you're feeling. Less confused than before, or is your head still buzzing? If it is, don't forget we will post a link to a glossary that will help you later. Now, let's look in a bit more detail at the ILC grant strategy, where it's been and what's happening with the new strategy. Before we do that, I'm going to take just a little sip of water, excuse me. Okie dokes. So the ILC policy was written in 2015 and it really sets out the purpose of ILC. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but if you're keen, you can find a link to this on our website too. Right from the beginning, the ILC has been a really important part of the NDIS's insurance model, because by making, building the capacity of people with disability, families, carers, will reduce the need for funding of supports through NDIS plans. That policy document sets out 5 key aims of the ILC. I'll put the actual policy wording on the screen, but I'm going to translate these into plain English just to make it easier on everyone's ears. So the 5 aims are making mainstream services in the community more inclusive, fostering innovation, minimising the need for escalation of support. That really just means preventing things from getting worse so that people are more likely to be able to participate without needing extra support, helping out carers, and helping people help themselves and each other. That's what we really mean by individual capacity building and peer support, just helping people help themselves and each other. So this might be a good moment to pause and reflect on these aims. If you like, you can share your thoughts in the comments. I wonder which of these aims inspires you. And are any similar to the work you already do in your community or in your business? So feel free to share with your other participants in the chat, or if you like, maybe just hang on to that thought because it might be the start of an idea. Now let's have a look at the ILC grant strategy. Back in November 2016, the NDIA produced a document called the ILC Commissioning Framework, and that was the NDIA's first plan for making ILC grants. Since then, the NDIA has funded more than 200 ILC projects across Australia, and you can find the full lists on the NDIS website. We will also post a link to where you can find that on our at the end of today. Late last year, the NDIA released their second plan for ILC grants, which is this new ILC funding strategy, which we'll just call, in short, Towards 2022. So the aim of ILC has not changed in that document, but the structure of the grant program has changed. I'm going to share a couple of diagrams with you now that come from this document. If it is a little bit difficult to read on screen, don't forget you can download the full document from the links that we'll post for you on our website, and we'll share them at the end of today's webinar too. So first of all, what's changed since 2016? Well, we're going to see more scope for longer term projects. In the past, many ILC grants were for 12 months. Now projects will be up to 3 years long. And what the length will be will depend on the individual grant round, but certainly up to 3 years long, which obviously creates a lot more opportunity for projects with a bigger scope and to develop a more sustainable program. There'll be greater focus on the measurement of ILC. So if you already follow the quarterly reports from the NDIA, they track the progress, have been tracking the progress of the NDIS rollout in terms of NDIS plans. They will now be reporting on ILC alongside that as well. And finally, the third one of these changes that I think is really exciting is that the new ILC strategy is also funding support, not just to run programs, but to build the skills and knowledge of organisations to be able to run ILC programs, including the webinar that you're enjoying right now. Next, let's have a look at the new ILC framework. So the purpose of ILC hasn't changed. It is still to invest in inclusion. Neither has the outcome. You can think of the outcome as like the big, hairy master goal that the program is looking for. That's at the bottom. People with disability actively contributing as full citizens. The middle of the sandwich is what's a little bit different. So I'm going to break it down for you. First of all, there are 5 investment principles. Each of these will apply to some or all of the grant programs, and those are what will really help guide decisions about the sorts of projects that are going to be funded with an ILC grant. We're going to look at those more closely in our next webinar. Today, we're going to look at the 4 ILC grant programs. Each of them has an investment objective, a reason that they're being funded, and an outcome, the goal that they're looking for. So they are the Individual Capacity Building Program, the National Information Program, the Mainstream Capacity Building Program, and the Economic and Community Participation Program. We're going to take a closer look at them one by one. Before we go on, just a short note of caution. This is a general overview of each program. So the requirements of each grant round that come out under these programs might be different. So if you are going to apply, just make sure you carefully read the information that comes out with that grant. This is just a general overview. First, the Individual Capacity Building Program. The aim of this program is to make sure that people with disability have the knowledge, skills and confidence to participate. It does that by funding peer support, mentoring and other skill building for people with disability carers and families. In other words, helping people help themselves and each other. It can also fund support for people in special circumstances. So I'll give you an example. Imagine you're an organisation that helps people who have a cognitive impairment who are at risk of going to jail. An ILC program might help someone in that very specific circumstance get specialised support to build their self-awareness, understand their rights and engage with the legal system. The program is targeting DFPOs. So that stands for Disabled Peoples and Families Organisations. Another one for the glossary. It also offers funding to organisations that are run by and for other important groups, such as CALD, C-A-L-D, which stands for Culturally and Linguistically Diverse People, or in other words, multicultural groups, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, intersex, transgender, questioning and other people, and people in regional and remote areas. There's already been one grant round awarded, which was called the Disabled Peoples and Families Organisations ILC Readiness Grant Round 2018-19. But because I am so fond of nicknames and it makes it easier on your ears, we'll call that the DPFO round. So that was came out in December last year. It was awarded in April, but there will be more grant rounds to come within this program as well. Nacho has just raised a really important question. What is the meaning of PWD? It means people with disability. We might need to add that one to the glossary, Kirsten. So thank you very much, Nacho.
Michael's got a question.
And Michael, you've got a question. Can a group which includes people with disability and people with family members with disability be eligible for this grant? Yes, and we might actually save that question, Michael, for when we have the NDIA representative on the line, because there are some things that might be changing around the definition of what is a DPFO, but it can be people with organisations run by people with disability or their family members. Okay. There's another side to the individual capacity building program as well. You might have heard this phrase before, nothing about us without us. It means that the people who a program helps should be able to participate in choosing the solution. So that's why those DPFOs or the priority groups have been targeted to deliver projects under this grant program. Next up, we have the National Information Program, and I'm going to need another sip of water, excuse me. The aim of this program is to make sure that people with disability are connected and have the information that they need to make choices and decisions. This round has already closed. It happened in May and we're waiting to hear the results right now. But there will be future rounds as well. Really the aim of this program is to develop a single source of truth for information. So there's a lot of information out there for people who are living with disability, but it's not all necessarily consistent. So the aim is to have information that's evidence-based, that's consistent nationally. And organisations can apply to develop and also to distribute information. So the funding's not just to make the information product, but also to make sure that it's distributed so it reaches the people who need it. In the National Information Program, that information can take the form of products or activities. So products are things like websites, brochures, videos or webinars, or activities like workshops or training sessions and so on. The information might target people with a specific condition, their families and carers. So, for example, people with autism or people who've had a brain injury. But information can also be used targeting mainstream organisations like the health system, the education system and the other support systems that we all use. That might be something like an advice guide for creating an inclusive culture in somebody's workplace. It might be about targeting businesses with advice guides for how they can make the experience that their customers enjoy more inclusive for everyone. Or it could be information that targets specific groups like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, multicultural groups, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex and questioning, and regional and remote communities as well. Remember, there's nothing about us without us. So if targeting a specific group, then the application in the National Information Program round that just came out did have to be from an organisation that was led by and for people in that specific group. The third program is the Mainstream Capacity Building Program, and its aim is to make sure that people with disability can use and benefit from the same mainstream services as everyone else. There hasn't been any rounds released yet, so we're expecting to see some more specifics on what this program will look like then. What we do know now is that the focus is going to be on providing short-term catalyst investments. In other words, we probably see funding for a shorter time that will be focused on getting projects started or growing projects that will help make the changes that we need to see to make mainstream systems more inclusive. I think this program is really exciting because there's huge scope here for all kinds of organisations, not only those that already work with people with disability to get involved. So JFC Purple Orange is one local disability organisation that I know is doing a project around inclusive schools. But if you look at the list of people that have been funded, there are other mainstream organisations that have done really cool things with ILC too. Playgroup SA was funded to trial an inclusive playgroup model, for example, which included training for their volunteers to make playgroups more inclusive. The YMCA as well, I'm aware, was funded for a project to co-design some training resources to upskill their staff and volunteers. So there's lots of scope for all kinds of organisations in this space. Finally, there's the Economic and Community Participation Program. Its aim is for people with disability to use and benefit from the same community activities as everyone else. This program will fund two types of projects. First of all, projects that will help people with disability get involved in activities, employment, and support in their community. That could be anything from playing at the local footy club, going to the library. It could also be employment, getting a job, or creating your own business. It will also fund things that will help communities and employers be more inclusive of everybody, regardless of their ability. Again, this program's yet to be announced, but there has been an interim round, like the DPFO grant round. That was a shorter round for 12 months of funding, and it was really focused on economic participation. So looking at programs that would help people access employment or build their own business. Possibly in the future, we might see some rounds focused on community participation there. I'm just, Curtis just pointing out to me that you are all posting some fantastic questions. So please do stick around. I appreciate that, and keep posting your questions because we will have our live Q&A coming up not far away now. We're about 3/4 of the way through. So that is we've covered now the new strategy towards 2022. There have been some grant rounds that have already been released, and there'll be many more opportunities each financial year. So if you're passionate about making Australia more inclusive of everybody, now is a great time to start getting ready. But as we've mentioned, there are already more than 200 projects that have been funded. So I'm going to share with you some examples from South Australia now. The first project we're going to look at comes from Anglicare SA. And many thanks to Mary Awata, the Principal of Multicultural Services at Anglicare, for sharing this story with us so we can share it with you. Anglicare were funded in the ILC Jurisdictional Round 2 to produce a short video to help address the stigma around that a disability that exists in many different cultures. The video is called In Our Own Words. And in that video, we see people from lots of different cultural backgrounds talking about their experience of living with disability or caring for a family member with disability, including Aboriginal people, Anglo-Saxon Australians, and people born overseas. For example, one of the people that speaks is John. He speaks in his own words, in his own language, about how disability is looked at differently in Australia from what is known in Arab countries. That we see disability as treatable and that with proper treatment, you can live a better life. The full video goes for about 5 minutes, and I do encourage you to take the time to watch it. We will be posting a link at the end of the webinar, so I encourage you to go and watch that and also share it. That video is just the final outcome of what was a much larger piece of work for Anglicare. It started when Anglicare noticed the much lower uptake of services by culturally and linguistically diverse communities. So in 2017, before they applied for the ILC grant, they conducted some research with Flinders University to understand exactly why that was. Again, we will share the link to that research at the end of today. The research that Flinders University did talked with lots of people from different cultural backgrounds and their families and communities. What that study found was that the biggest barrier by far was the stigma around disability. Within those groups, there can be a different understanding of what disability means. There can be a different attitude to individual choice and control. So, for example, some people from refugee backgrounds may never have had the opportunity to have individual choice and control due to their experiences in their country of origin or the countries where they sought refuge. So that might be a difficult thing to understand. Also, the NDIS's idea of individual choice and control over funding, for example, with an NDIS plan, can be a bit of a mismatch with cultures that put a greater significance on the family and the needs of the community rather than on individual choice. People might also just simply be unaware of how the social support systems in Australia operate. So the solution, once they'd understood that that was the problem, was to educate people in their own words. And Anglicare chose to use video because it's accessible, it's easy to translate into English, and it's very, very relatable. It means that people are able to access the video physically in a medium that lasts, that is shareable, but also, as Mary shared with me, when you hear from real people like you do in the video, it touches people's hearts, and that has far more impact. The outcome, well, Anglicare already runs annual forums with different cultural communities at which they share information and consult with those community leaders. So the outcome was that they shared the video at their annual forum in March this year that was attended by 60 different community leaders. At that meeting, everyone got a USB with the video that they could then share with their own communities, but they also were shared the results of the research. Anglicare have made the videos available to anyone working with culturally and linguistically diverse communities to share. And many other service providers are now using those, as well as obviously the Anglicare staff as well. So I think in summary, what we can see from this story is that the project has used storytelling in lots of different ways. By listening to people's stories, Anglicare was able to understand people's needs. They've created a powerful communication with the video. And finally, they've used the forum to share the story of the project with the communities who'd been involved from the very start. So they could see the difference that their contribution had made. They could see that their voice had been heard. So now it's time for a pop quiz. Don't worry, I'm not going to mark you, so you can't really get it wrong. But I'm wondering, which type of program do you think this activity would fit into in the new ILC strategy? It could be the individual capacity building program. because breaking down stigma does help make sure that people with disability have the knowledge, skills and confidence to participate. But this series could also meet some of the goals of the mainstream capacity building program, because it's also helping educate service providers about the needs of people from different cultural backgrounds. The next case study shows that you don't need to be a big organisation like Anglicare to make a great impact with an ILC project. ILC grants can also be used to help a small grassroots service grow and develop. The South Australian Council on Intellectual Disability, or SACID, is a small organisation that's working towards a community where people with intellectual disability are involved and accepted as equal participating members. SACID was funded again through the jurisdictional round 2 to develop SA Inclusion Point. They were the lead organisation applying for the grant, but they also worked with partner organisation, the New South Wales Council for Intellectual Disability, and that connection was really helpful to getting that service up and running. Back before the ILC grant, SACID had no paid staff and no income stream from services. Its activities were totally volunteer driven. And they were offering some information about intellectual disability, but it was on quite a small scale. So the ILC funding for SA Inclusion Point has really allowed SACID to grow their impact. What they used the funding for was to employ people with intellectual disability as casual inclusion workers. Now, this isn't supported employment. The inclusion workers are paid full award rates for the work that they do, speaking with groups about how to include people with disability, helping make easy read information, setting up groups for people with intellectual disability so they can have their voice heard, and helping out at workshops and events. They started with 3 workers, and SACID has just hired a 4th person into this role. Now, the first 6 months of that ILC project meant a fair bit of work, because SA Inclusion Point had to make sure that their recruitment and staff processes were accessible for people with disability. For example, translating documents like this job description into an easy read format. Once the inclusion workers were on board, however, SA Inclusion Point was live and they started delivering workshops. The Get More Skills workshop was the first, and it was focused on helping people develop the skills they'd need to participate in getting an NDIS plan. Now that the inclusion workers were on board, they also had a say in what skills and knowledge they would like to learn about and teach. And that's led to SA Inclusion Point's next workshop series called My Right to Safety. It's running in August, and we will share a link with you if you're interested at the end of the show today. So in summary, SA Inclusion Point includes people with intellectual disability in more than one way: by employing people with disability, by providing information to mainstream systems, service providers and the broader community about how to include people with intellectual disability, and skill building workshops for people with intellectual disability as well. SACID has also been successful winning a grant in the DPFO ILC Readiness Individual Capacity Building Grant round. Now, in that DPFO round, organisations had to meet certain criteria for presence of people with a disability or their family members as part of their board, staff, volunteers or members. The DPFOs had to apply for grant funds to do 2 things: a project to build the skills of people with disability, but they also had to direct some funds to building their organisation's capacity. For the first part, SACID will create peer action groups who will work on projects out in the community. And for the second part, SACID's taking the lead project will fund governance training for their entire board. So in the past, the board's been self-educated using online materials, but they aren't adapted to the needs of the board members that have an intellectual disability. So the funds will help with that adaptation, but they'll also provide direct support for board members to fully participate in the board meetings. For example, help with previewing the board papers. This means being on the board is no tokenistic gesture. It's really full inclusion and full engagement. So another pop quiz. this one's really too easy. Of course, this would fit into the individual capacity building program. The next example is an organisation who've used an ILC grant to take a successful project to a new region. HCO's Neighbourhood Links project was funded through the jurisdictional round to grow their program from a single group to 5 across the Adelaide Hills and adjacent areas. It's based on a successful UK program called the Keyring model. And they chose to grow this because existing evaluation they'd already done showed that participants in Neighbourhood Links were more engaged and less socially isolated. Neighbourhood Links brings together up to 9 people who are living independently or intending to move out of home. All the participants live within a close distance of each other, creating a linked up support network that complements but doesn't replace the daily living supports that participants get through their NDIS plans. Each month, one of the Neighbourhood Links participants hosts a meeting to catch up and talk about different topics of interest or things that are important to them living independently. For example, they recently had a meeting about the federal election. That created an opportunity to develop awareness of how to vote and our electoral and government system. One of those 9 people is the facilitator of the group. They're paid and work an average of 15 hours a week at level 2 of the SHADS award, providing on-call and drop-in support to participants. The role is to really develop a relationship with each of those participants and to help them come up with their own solutions to daily living programs. To daily living problems. The facilitator is available 24/7 within reason for the participants to call on if they need help. So say, for example, the power goes off at 10:30 at night. The facilitator might not attend, but the participant could phone them and they'll help them problem solve and act on any emergency plans. So gaining the ILC funding has allowed Neighbourhood Links to start more groups in more locations while still being free to the participants. There's now a second group in Mount Barker joining their original group. There's another group starting in the Victor Harbour area soon and more to come. Again, we'll share a link about Neighbourhood Links at the end of today. Which program might this fit into? Yep. It's the individual capacity building program again, making sure that people have the knowledge, skills and confidence to participate and contribute in their local community. Finally, ILC initiatives can build over time too. This example is with Autism SA. They've been successful in getting multiple ILC grants, starting with the very first grant round in 2017. That grant round allowed for the creation of the Autism Friendly Charter website, taking an initiative that was state-based, national. If you visit autismfriendlycharter.org.au, you can find training that's available online and sign up to be registered as an autism-friendly business. Autism SA has now been funded in subsequent rounds to make an app mapping safe autism-friendly spaces and also to develop online resources. Which program? Well, perhaps the mainstream capacity building program, because having autism-friendly places helps people with disability use and benefit from the same services as everyone else. If you'd like more inspiration, there are places that you can look, and we will share these links at the end of today as well. So now we've had our tour of ILC, maybe think back to what inspired you before when we looked at ILC's purpose. We've seen how ILC can help organisations, big or small, to keep a good thing going or extend the reach of a program to more people, like HCO's Neighbourhood Links and SACID's Inclusion Point. We've seen how ILC can provide funding to do something quite small that makes a big impact, like Anglicare's video. You can also use ILC grant funding to support people with disability who won't have an NDIS plan, to create opportunities and make change in the community, or to help people with specific needs. So now you know what's in store with the new ILC strategy. I wonder, what can you imagine doing with the things your organisation's good at? If anything was possible, what would you do? What problem would you like to solve? In a moment, we're going to start our live Q&A. So I'm going to skip through this little bit because we have Kim on the line just for the next 10 minutes. But I'll just quickly let you know that there is a timeline that has been published for ILC. It is a little bit behind. We're expecting the individual capacity building program to come out soon, and with that, a new timeline. So I think we'll just go ahead and start our live Q&A now. So we do have Kim from the NDIA on the line. Kim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Hi, I'm Kim Taylor. I work in the ILC branch at the NDIA and have been working closely on previous grant rounds, but also some of the upcoming grant rounds and getting them ready as well.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to have a look at some of our questions that have already come through, Kim. There's been some great ones that have come up on today's session. So the first was from Michael, and he's asked, can a group which includes people with disability and people with family members with disability be eligible for the individual capacity building grant? Have you got any more information you can share about how a DPFO is defined?
Yeah, sure. So the answer is yes. And if they are an incorporated organisation or they meet one of the legal entity types, then they are able to apply for a grant on their own. But if they're not an incorporated legal entity type that's in the grant opportunity guidelines, so things like they are a group that are unincorporated, they can still apply through an auspice organisation. So basically an organisation that will help them with the application and go into the agreement with the NDIA, but that group is then the ones that actually deliver the grant and have that partnership with the auspice organisation that is a legal entity. So the NDIA is unable to enter into a grant agreement with an organisation that doesn't meet one of their legal entity types.
Yep. So just to summarise, I think if I've got this right, Kim, the types of organisations that can't apply would be individual people.
Yep.
And unincorporated associations, but those unincorporated associations can apply for a grant if they are auspiced.
Correct. And other ineligible entity types include sole traders and international organisations.
Great. Thank you very much. So with the previous round that came out for DPFOs, Kim, it had said that people had to have at least half, I think, of their organisations, board, staff, volunteers or members being represented by people with disability or their families. Is that likely to change at all, or can you clarify whether that means they have to have any one of those things being 50% people with disability, or is it all of those things?
Yeah, no, great question. I can't quite give you the exact criteria that we'll be using because we've just got to make sure it's fair and equitable. So when we are able to release the guidelines and that sort of thing, we'll be able to be more specific on that. But I can say that the eligibility criteria will be very similar. But we're particularly looking for organisations that are led by people with disabilities. So in terms of more than 50% on their board and more than 50% staff.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So I guess the takeout there is read your grant requirements carefully. And if you keep following us on the ILC Ready program, we'll certainly share and unpack those as they come out.
Yeah. I should also add that if there are organisations that are still led by people with disability, but they're quite small, they don't have a board, they don't have a staff, then they are still eligible too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, the next one. Is there a cap amount for grants available to organisations? Is there a maximum dollar amount?
So the short answer is no. The slightly longer answer is it is still something that we consider when selecting grants. So making sure that there isn't duplication of funding to deliver the same thing at the same time. And it is a consideration in terms of how much funding has gone towards a particular organisation and their capacity to deliver a number of grants and that sort of thing. But there is no cap for a particular organisation to receive funding for. And again, exactly what you were saying before, read the grant opportunity guidelines carefully, because some of the grants will have a cap in terms of the maximum amount that can be applied for, and also potentially the lowest amount that can be applied for too. So, but that's in terms of that particular grant, not in terms of the organisation's total grants that they've received.
Great. Thank you so much. Next question. Would the NDIA be looking for programs that combine two or more of the focus areas? So looking at those, I mean, we presented today the 4 distinct grant programs. Sarah's asked, I understand that providing the grant timelines, it wouldn't be the case that one organisation applies for both within the same program. But if two projects that are complete with specific outcomes in themselves, but together could create even more impact, would that be seen as a plus when applying? So if the organisation had applied under 2 streams, I think that's what Sarah's saying. Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. Basically, for each of the programs, we do very much are looking for applications for projects that are targeting that particular activity area for ILC. In terms of it, and I think, you know, a good example is individual capacity building. That's something that could still occur even if your project's focusing on economic and community participation or something like that. So that's one that's often you see projects that come through or that get funded will have an element of that as well as the other. But we are very much looking for projects that meet the outcomes and the objectives for that particular activity area. If it also helps in another area as well, then you know that's fine. It doesn't make them ineligible for that grant, but it's not necessarily a benefit. So it's not as if we're looking at all 4 activity areas in each of those programs. We're really trying to see strong programs that will address the outcomes for each of those activity areas in each of the separate programs. Great, thank you. We've got lots more questions coming through. If we aren't able to answer them all in the next 2 minutes, never fear. We will be keeping that chat open and we will be able to address them perhaps later on and send you all an email. So we've got one more here from Michael. Is this a type of ILC grant that local government can access when we want to develop resources to change how we operate? I think Michael might have been talking about the mainstream capacity building grant there. Is that correct, Michael? I don't know if Michael's still on the line. Unless he corrects us, let's assume it is. Yeah, so I can answer that question. So local governments are an eligible entity type across all the 4 programs. And particularly economic and community participation and mainstream capacity building, we would be thinking that we'd get applications from local governments in terms of those areas. It's only really in terms of the individual capacity building program where we are really wanting to provide funding towards organisations that are led by and for people with disability. But in saying that, local governments are eligible across them, but particularly economic and community participation and mainstream capacity building, they could make the most difference in those areas and something that we consider funding. Fantastic, thank you. Sarah, have we got time for one last question? One last question. One last question, and then we'll say goodbye to Sarah, but I will stay on the line and share some more information with you about what's coming up in the next webinars. And I can also answer any questions then about the ILC program, ILC Ready program that we're delivering for you. So the last questions, Kim, from Nacho. At Kudos, we have 2 sides of our for-purpose business. First of all, they are the ECEI partners in South Australia. But secondly, they are also the NDIS registered provider for therapy supports for people who are over 7. Would they be able to apply for an ILC grant to develop some capacity building in the community that they're also working with, providing therapy supports?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and unfortunately I can't answer it at this stage. It would be something to look at in the guidelines when they come out, and we're still working on them at the moment. So in our previous grants, partners and NDIS registered providers have been able to apply. It's still something that is, I guess, being considered, more so in terms of partners, but what I can say is that NDIS registered service providers are likely to still be able to apply for some of our upcoming grants, but it would be really worth looking at the guidelines when they come out for each program, because they may be slightly different to what's happened previously and slightly different between the programs as well. Sorry, I can't provide a yes or no answer to that one today.
Okay, but again, the key message there is read the grant requirements carefully.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kim. Everyone, please do stay on the line. I've got a little bit more information to share with you, and we will keep the chat open. We're also repeating this webinar on Monday, and there will be a representative of the NDIA with us again. So if you do have more questions, we can get them answered then as well. So thank you very much, Kim. Now, I will go back to our presentation, and we've just got a little bit more information to share about the ILC Ready program. So in today's webinar, we've covered buzzwords. We've looked at what disability is and what inclusion means. We've looked at the ILC and its role as part of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the 5 main aims of ILC, and the different ILC programs that are coming out for grant funding. Finally, we shared some examples of some South Australian-based ILC projects. This is just the first in a whole series of activities in the ILC Ready training program. Our second webinar is called Your ILC Opportunity, and in that one we'll be looking at the investment objectives and principles that really inform the kinds of projects that are suitable for funding, the role of partnerships and collaboration, and some of the learnings and feedback the NDI has given after previous grant rounds as well. Please go to our website to book in for those. They're happening from the 16th of July. Our third webinar will look more closely at planning an ILC project. And again, there's lots of different times to choose from there, starting with Tuesday, the 30th of July. The webinars are just the start. We're also touring the state in August with a workshop that will help you learn some skills in designing and planning a project for social impact and how to apply for a grant as well. If you're not sure whether ILC is for you or not yet, that's fine, because the knowledge and skills that you'll take away are also going to help in other areas of your work. Finally, we do have applications open as well for one-to-one support. There will be 20 organisations selected to receive one-to-one support from our CBB consulting team to help develop their ILC project idea ready for funding in future grant rounds. So I encourage you to get involved, come to the rest of the webinars, come to the workshops, and if you share the link at the bottom of your screen or visit cbb.com.au/ILC, then you can register to sign up and hear about all of those opportunities. Everything in the ILC Ready program is free, thanks to funding from South Australia's Department of Human Services through its NDIA Community Inclusion and Capacity Development Grant. So that's it for our webinar today. A big thank you to Kim for sharing her time in our Q&A, and also thank you to our case studies, Sue Horsnell, CEO at HCO, Maria Wata from Anglicare, Felicity Crowther, the Executive Director of SACID and Autism SA, for sharing their projects and experience with me to share with you. I hope you've been inspired Thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you at the next webinar.